kids. All right, let's go to the phone right now. Bring in Jerry Tipton from the Lexington Herald Leader to talk about, well, the team that resides very close by, the University of Kentucky. How are you, Jerry?
I'm doing well. How are you all?
Great. Hey, Jerry, how scared were you and everybody else when Kentucky was playing Notre Dame over the weekend?
Well, I was scared about the deadline because of the game.
Would you explain, Jerry, would you explain to Les Shapiro that we writers, what we pull for is ourselves?
Well, of course, I know that. I know that Jerry's not sitting there rooting for Kentucky, but I'm sure everybody around him was scared.
Well, I'm just saying that he was rooting for his deadline. He wanted a short game. He wanted the game to be decided early. He couldn't write early. He had to wait till the game was over with. He had to wait till that final shot went up. And that's what we pull for, and that's what we want. We don't get scared unless it's midnight.
I'll tell you, the Kentucky's game Thursday started even later against West Virginia, but they got off to an 18-2 lead and just kind of blew it out. And I really enjoyed that game. I had my story done about 5-6 minutes ago. I could just sit there and just plug in the final score. Saturday, of course, it came right down to literally the last shot. And I heard, one of the other writers was saying he heard some Kentucky fan grumbling that this isn't good for a triple bypass. And I think that's, I mean, they've had games like that. You know, they're 38-0, but they're not invincible. Several teams have played them down to the last few minutes.
So not only, Jerry, did they almost lose that game, and that when that shot went up from the angle that I saw, it looked like it had a chance.
Looked like it was online.
Yeah, you're right. It was online. But now Kentucky's favored, it seems to me, by 5 points in the next game, and they haven't been the Wildcats haven't been favored by that few points, I believe, since they played Florida or Louisville earlier in the year. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I tell you, it was kind of funny. They just humiliated Kansas early in the season and humiliated UCLA, and we just sort of assumed that everyone assumed they were going to run through the SEC without any trouble. The first two games went into overtime against Ole Miss at home and then at Texas A&M. And they were down at LSU by 6 with about 7 minutes to go, then down at Georgia by 9 with about 6-7 minutes to go. So just knowing that Notre Dame was very good, I thought Notre Dame was excellent. I've been expecting games like that deep into the tournament rather than the kind of game we saw against West Virginia, which was, just kind of laughable.
Do you think I mean, it seemed to me that Notre Dame, let's look at the other side for a second, that Notre Dame had a good game plan going in. They played very smart, and they were sharp, and they were keeping Kentucky under control. But
didn't turn the ball over.
At some point in the game, you've got to make a decision that there's a kid in the middle that's just burning your ass every trip down the court, that you got to collapse on him or put a second guy on him. But it seemed like Notre Dame was just content's not the right word, but determined to keep using the same defense they'd used the entire game.
Yeah, that thought crossed my mind too, Woody. I think single coverage on the low post guy is just the way they go about it, and so I understand that you dance with the one that brung you, as they say, and of course Karl Anthony Towns was going to work on that one defender. I thought late in the game, just to maybe show Kentucky something different, throw a double team on them, or a triple team for that matter, just to see how, maybe they'd throw the ball away because they hadn't seen it, something like that. And conversely, on the offensive end, Notre Dame really executed well, as you said, but then I thought they changed a little bit. In the last few minutes, they started milking the clock, and I wondered about it.
Good.
But I wondered if they should have just kept playing at the tempo they were playing because they were executing so well.
You're absolutely right, Jerry. It seemed to me like they were trying to shorten the game, and obviously that's what they were trying to do, but that took them more out of their own rhythm and allowed Kentucky to kind of think themselves through what was going on there, and they were taking advantage. It seemed to me the Wildcats were taking advantage of every trip down as a result of Notre Dame slowing it down, trying to use up so much clock.
Yeah, it seemed like there were 2 or 3 times where Notre Dame was left with the ball with the shot clock winding down, and they just had to just throw something up rather than for the bulk of the game just running their offense, throwing passes, the guys cutting to the basket, getting good scoring opportunities that way.
Hey, Jerry, you're playing, or I shouldn't say you, sorry about that. Kentucky is playing Wisconsin in one semifinal, and Wisconsin has a couple of NBA prospects in Decker and Kaminsky, who are big guys who play outside and can knock down the three-pointer. Will John Calipari have his guys, Karl Anthony Towns and Willie Cauley-Stein, chase those guys outside? How do you think he's going to play this?
Well, that's an interesting point because coaches have been talking. Of course, one of the storylines that we've been beating into the ground this year is how to beat Kentucky. Well, what do you need to do? And most coaches have said 2 things. One, you have to hit some perimeter shots because just going right to the basket against those big guys is problematical. The other thing they talk about, which is kind of the same thing, is if your big guys can shoot from outside and at least draw those guys, the Kentucky big guys, away from the basket some, then they're not nearly as effective as shot blockers when they have to kind of react and move rather than just kind of wait for you to come to them on the drive. So I think Wisconsin has the means in that respect to certainly to compete with Kentucky and maybe beat them.
That was the other point that I felt at the end of the game, that both Duke and Wisconsin, and I'm saying that, but both Duke and Wisconsin say, look how well Notre Dame played them. Guys, we can do this. That it's not after the West Virginia game, as you well know, everybody was saying, oh, nobody could beat this team. They do belong in the NBA Eastern Conference Finals, but this looked like a team that is beatable now and that is vincible.
Well, it's funny, nobody's talking about it, but Georgia played Kentucky really well. They led by 9, which is the biggest second-half deficit Kentucky's had all season. And part of the reason they did it was they had a forward who could face the basket and shoot, and then when Kentucky's big guys would come out on him, he could drive around them. And, they were pretty effective with it. They missed a lot of free throws down the stretch, or they might have got Kentucky that night.
Hey, Jerry, watching college basketball all year, a lot of people feel Jahlil Okafor is the number 1 pick in this upcoming draft. After watching Karl Anthony Towns, though, against Notre Dame and the way Kentucky kept feeding him and he kept converting and executing, I'm thinking in a lot of people's minds maybe Karl Anthony Towns jumped Okafor as the consensus number 1 pick in this upcoming draft. I know that you've watched Karl Anthony Towns a lot more than Okafor, so let me ask you this. Is Karl Anthony Towns going to be not just a good NBA player, but a superb NBA player in your estimation?
Well, I think he can be. I tell you, we watched them. This is going back a little bit, but last August, Kentucky went on a trip to the Bahamas where they played 6 exhibition games, and the media we generally don't get to go to practice, but they let us go to these practices prior to that trip. And Karl Anthony Towns is a much better perimeter shooter and face-the-basket player than really he's shown this season. He looked really comfortable shooting those shots. Kentucky, their coaches have talked about they just want him around the basket, or at least to develop that part of his offense this season. So I think he's a really good player, and I think it's no secret that he's going to be an early pick. Everybody thinks that. Okafor reminds me of a young Tim Duncan. He just seems very fundamentally sound, and I think he's got a better offensive game around the basket than Karl Anthony Towns does right at this moment. But it's like a firm Denali dar, to use a horse racing term. I mean, they're both thoroughbreds. They're both excellent prospects.
You made a reference of Okafor and Tim Duncan. And watching that game and watching the tournament, it seems to me like Towns is it's like somebody locked him in a room and said, "Watch Kareem Abdul-Jabbar around the basket." Did you get to? I mean, he's got that nice little jump hook kind of thing that
You can go
Kareem
left, you
had.
can go right.
Yeah, it almost he reminded me a lot of Kareem when he was Lou Alcindor and playing in college. Had the same sort of framework. Have you heard that reference at all or comparison?
No, I really haven't, to be honest. But he's got, like you say, he's got a variety of moves around the basket, and most people, well, everybody really, has played him with more than one defender. Most opponents this year have their number one job or the number one thing on their game plan was to take away the low post scoring from Kentucky and kind of roll the dice on their perimeter shooting. It kind of comes and goes, that's their perimeter shooting. It's not the strength, but the thinking has been that if you let them operate around the basket, especially Towns, he's clearly their best low post scorer, that he'll be very productive. He'll make a very high percentage of his shots. I'll tell you, the interesting thing is you guys haven't mentioned it, but against West Virginia, he only had 1 point. He didn't have a basket in that game. And that's kind of been the story of this Kentucky team. You know, their record, 38-0, makes you think, just tremendous consistency. But when you look at them individually, there's a lot of inconsistency. They go up and down individually. But they have so many really good players that there's always players that are on the uptick, and they win.
Jerry, we appreciate you joining us. That was really
Informative.
informative. Yeah. I was looking for the right word. It was good, and I'm from the South, so that's about as good as I get. That was good stuff, Jerry. How do people follow you on Twitter? What's your email address? What's your home phone number?
Well, I tell you, our website is Kentucky.com. That should be nice and easy to remember. And, that's all our stuff is on that.
Jerry, I got to tell you, please say hello to the biggest Kentucky fan in the world, he calls himself. He used to be the publisher and the editor of your newspaper, and I'm sure you had a lot of dealings with him, and he's one of my closest friends, and I'll leave it at that.
I hope you're talking about Tim Kelly.
Tim Kelly was my boss at one time. He has been my friend for now about 40 years, so Tim has front row seats at the Kentucky games, and I know he's sitting at home now wetting his pants waiting for the weekend.
But Tim likes to think of him as a guy that discovers young talent, and you're one of the guys he mentions as somebody he discovers. He takes credit for that.
Yeah, well, that's fine. That's what. Why not? Let him take all the credit. Thank you, Jerry.
Jerry, thanks.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
This is Jerry Tipton of the Lexington Herald Leader. And that segment sponsored by John Elway Chevrolet, Colorado's #1 Chevy dealer.
When you go to buy a car, what do you really want? You probably want a lot of cars to choose from. And you want the dealership's best price. Not some starting price or target price, the best price. And you want it immediately, not after hours of negotiating. And you want a salesperson who doesn't get paid more if you spend more. Because, well, you don't want to spend more. Well, you're in luck. John Elway wants all of those things too. Better yet, John Elway wants you to have all of those things too. Come see us or click on elwaydealers.com.